Hi, I'm Anthony Sammarco and I'm the author of Lost Boston. And today we're visiting what was once known as the New York streets of Boston. This is an area today that has tremendously changed over the last decade. But at one time it was actually an area which was inhabited by people of all walks of life. We'd see both Russian Jews, Greeks, Italians, and all sorts of immigrants who had come to Boston and sought a better life and lived in this area. Today, this neighborhood itself is bound by the Southeast Expressway, Dover Street, or if you're a new Bostonian, West Berkeley Street, Washington Street, and of course, the end of the Massachusetts Turnpike. This few acres of land itself had developed in the period of the 19th century, much like much of Boston. And in the period of the 1840s through the 1890s, not just Boston's South End, but Boston's Back Bay was created as man-made land. Well, this area itself really began to take on new prominence in the 1830s, because in 1831, the Boston and Albany Railroad was chartered. It was to connect Boston with Albany, New York, with a railroad. And it was an important feature because it was a new means of transportation. Boston itself would see this railroad, which was chartered in 1831, take a decade to complete. But when it was completed, it provided a means of transportation that not only provided passenger transportation, but also the importation of cargo goods. The Boston and Albany Depot was located on Nealon Street at Albany Street. Well, in a lot of ways, the New York streets themselves were streets that were known as Seneca, Oneida, Oswego, Genesee, Rochester, Troy, and of course, Albany Street that still survives. But in the period of the 19th century, these streets themselves, when they were laid out and built with not only row houses, but in the latter part of the 19th century, tenement flats. Tenements were an important feature for not only the development of the land, but it was also the fact that many of the immigrants who were not urban dwellers before they came to Boston saw this as something that they not only could live, but live fairly comfortably. And after World War II, there was a new adage. They wanted a new Boston. And the new Boston was something in a lot of ways that tried to sweep aside the old and build anew. We have to realize that the New York streets were the first aspect of urban renewal in the mid-20th century. And the whole area would be cleared with one huge urban block. And in that instance, that urban block itself was ripe for development because Boston thought the only way to reduce taxes and, of course, increase property values was to have factories in the city. But one of the anchors that would actually be here for many, many decades was the Boston Herald. The Herald Traveler would build its major newspaper in such a way that it was at what is today Harrison Avenue and the edge of the Massachusetts Turnpike. Not only are buildings being demolished and new ones built, but it's taking on a new aspect, a new character. And in some ways, places such as the Ink Block, a residential condominium and apartment building that actually in some ways replaces the old Boston Herald, but echoes the name of the ink used to print the newspaper, is a perfect example of the new Boston. But today, if one asks anyone under the age of 60 what the New York streets are, it's something in a lot of ways that no one can actually repeat. It's not that they know it, it's not the fact that they don't know it, it's just that it's not part of our evolution of the history of Boston.